Ludlow, the co-host of Bloomberg Technology, and we're really grateful to Techonomy for bringing us all together. The three of us have spoken candidly in the last 24 hours or so, and I kind of promised them three things, which is data, disagreement, hopefully, between the three of us, and then a dynamic conversation. So we'll see how far that gets us. Let's start with the data point, if you allow me, and then I will shut up and we'll hear from three people that really know what they're talking about. And the data comes from Bloomberg New Energy Finance Research, of course, plug. In 2022, around $60 billion of venture and private equity money flowed into startups working on climate solutions. That's data point number one. And Sophie, we'll get to you. I know you track a similar data set. The median size of a deal jumped from around 7 million in 2021 to around 10 million, and bigger checks were getting written. Unsurprisingly, the transport industry kind of dominates that, and we'll get into that. But unsurprisingly, most of those dollars flowed to startups here in the United States. And I think that's where we want to start with you, Sophie Purdom. The United States.
Yes.
Are we ahead of the curve when it comes to financing and funding climate-related startups, or are we playing catch-up?
Great question. Good place to start. And thanks, everyone, for listening. Is the U.S. ahead? If you'd asked just a couple of years ago, I think if we'd polled the audience, the answer probably would have been no. We would have thought perhaps maybe Europe, right, would have been leading the charge. But if we go back to the data, and not to make this competitive or anything,
Please.
but I help run an organization called Climate Tech VC, which bottoms up has been tracking every deal that's happened in this space in the venture community for the past 3+ years or so. And we put that out publicly and for free through our newsletter and other mediums. We agree that about 60+% of the venture activity over the past 3 years has happened here in the US. And of all global activity, 25% has been headquartered here in California, which is kind of crazy to think about that level of concentration.
Where I want to go with this, Nneka, Kibuule, is basically we seem to be moving from a stage, and Montenegro was talking this a little bit, we're not in 2006 anymore, and I know you in particular want to invest in technology that is commercially viable and ready, rather than at the R&D stage. Are we there yet?
I think we're close to it. We're thinking about near-term decarbonization. That's technology that's at revenue, has really de-risked itself, and it's really about how do we multiply impact and scale. If you've noticed over the last year or two, there have been massive funds that have been raised by organizations like TPG and BlackRock, these large growth equity plays that would love to put in $100 million, $200 million into a deal. And the reality is, like, a lot of those firms that I've been talking to still haven't seen enough very large companies, very large deals. So we are really like maturing in terms of technology. There's a lot of technology out there, like solar. We've been seeing massive solar roll-ups, large, utility scale development plays. We've seen EV activity yield to really big deals, but there's a wide swath of the markets where we're still seeing some nascent money coming in. We invest in energy and transportation, but sustainable land use is an area that we're looking at in terms of climate tech, and we've seen that in the ag tech business and water and all of those things. Outside of carbon-related or carbon credits, carbon accounting, there still aren't quite the number of large companies that you would expect as it relates to like the diversity of all the climate solutions that are out there.
We plan to cover a wide range of sort of investment areas within climate. I'm going to bring Matthieu in just a second, but first, our first quick fire round. You mentioned some of the kind of growth equity players, and you mentioned EVs. I've covered that space for a while now. I'm thinking Rivian, I'm thinking Lucid. Simple, quick fire question. Were those deals overvalued?
Potentially. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes. Okay.
And so that's where we bring in Matthieu Soulé. So you're at C.Lab, BNP, C.Lab Americas. You basically are an advisory arm for what is a very large, multifaceted European bank, but you have a venture fund of your own.
Correct.
Where are you focused right now, and what kind of areas are you most excited about?
Sure. So the fund is itself 150 million euros, doing climate tech, so it's energy, mobility, food and ag, and also circular economy and biodiversity. So it's pretty large spectrum. our focus of investment is like Series A, B, tickets 3 to 5 millions. We like to invest in startups that are more B2B, so we can bring, in fact, clients or corporate clients of the bank, because the idea after that is to help them accelerate their decarbonization. So
yes.
we are talking about the large, I would say, sectors emitting the most, and we are looking to bring solutions to the client with startups that can help them, in fact, fast-track their decarbonization.
You've lived in San Francisco more than once, but European Bank, go back to that first question.
Yeah.
Which geography or jurisdiction leads the way in investing in this space? The Americas, Europe, APAC?
Unfortunately or not, it's always been the US. It's not specific to climate tech. In general, for ventures, like 40-45% of the total investment in the world is in the US, so it's not specific to climate. The only small difference is historically Europe is 15-20% of all venture investment, but in climate tech, and I will let Sophie comment on that,
yes.
but it's maybe like 30-35%, or it's actually ahead of Asia for that.
I'll go back to one data point, we'll bring Sophie in. The 3% growth in climate-related funding 2021 to 2022, many people in this room track different data sets, but 2022 in terms of VC-backed startups was not the same year as 2021. Why did climate-related technology stand out and continue to grow, albeit modestly?
Yes, and we similarly saw that very strong growth rate year over year, with the dollar value going into climate-related venture plateauing between 2021 and 2022, driven entirely by the decrease in the growth rounds,
yes.
right? So many of us invest quite early, but those large $500 million plus private rounds, those fell off a cliff, kind of right as the SPAC market also froze.
Well, that goes back to the original quickfire round. Were they overvalued? The original, 2021 was nuts, right? Yes, yes, and yes. Second quickfire round, does the private sector or the public sector drive investment into climate tech? I'll give you an opportunity to expand in a second.
Private.
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 I was hoping you'd disagree with Emma a moment ago, and it didn't really work. So that brings me to my actual question, which is the impact of the IRA.
Yeah.
Because I want to keep this focused in the news agenda as well. I think you all agree that the IRA, through a trickle-down effect, will see dollars flow to earlier stage startups. Nneka, how does that kind of manifest itself to your mind?
Yeah, for us, we're looking at how can we support our startups so that they don't have to continuously get into that kind of hedonistic Silicon Valley treadmill of raising more and more corporate equity. So for us, that means tax credits. Those are kind of non-dilutive funding dollars that are going directly into my startup so that they can, pause between fundraising rounds, or maybe not even have to raise another round. So that's really exciting there. I think the other piece is the IRA funding is hitting a number of parts of the infrastructure ecosystem, and the White House budget just got released, and they've put aside, I think, about $250 million for interconnection and permitting, environmental permitting support. So for me, it's not just direct cash that might come into my companies, it's cash that might make it easier for them to do their jobs, and also additional cash for their customers to get basically a discounted product as well.
Matthieu, a big part of what you do is data-driven, research-driven. How do you interpret the broader impact of the IRA?
No, I think it's beyond actually the dollar money, which is huge. We are talking about hundreds of billions. It's also a very strong signal for the private sectors. Europe was very concerned that maybe the IRA was never coming out because, as you might remember, it was just one vote short, I would say, on the good side. But it's a very strong signal for the private sector saying it's a good time to invest. So beyond startups investment, as you can see, we are talking about billions of dollars for batteries manufacturers, EVs, and many large industries. So it's a very strong signal beyond the startup world for investment or new investment in the US.
Sophie, we're at the halfway point almost exactly, and I do want to get some audience questions, but I'm hoping we get to the disagreement part. Yeah. Is there any limit to what the infrastructure bill, the IRA, actually will do? I think there's this idea that the Department of Energy, other public sector bodies are changing their approach because actually all they've done is poke around in R&D for quite a long time.
That's right. I've been really impressed with how over the past 3, 4, even years, the Department of Energy has essentially reorged from an organization that's been entirely focused on R&D for a long time, like you just mentioned, to focus on deployment. And that's essential, especially we benefit immensely from that as folks up here investing from the private sector side with working now hand in hand with the Department of Energy to identify key areas where the private sector can lead and areas where we can team up as a broader, stronger together kind of organization with the Department of Energy to go after these areas like hydrogen or long duration battery storage or carbon capture, et cetera, where it works better as a deployment team.
Nneka, you mentioned some of the other areas that Aligned Climate Ventures has looked at outside of things that we've been hit over the head with a lot, which is electric vehicles and charging stations. Let's go back to that original data point. Transportation still dominates where the dollars are flowing to. What other areas most excite you that have nothing to do with 4 wheels or more wheels?
I think that building electrification and how we think about buildings is really interesting. Buildings are particularly complicated because they're distributed, their ownership structures are very unique, and there's often this principal agent problem of who benefits from tech adoption versus who's actually going to be benefits like in a physical day-to-day way versus who's going to benefit from it financially is often kind of separated. There have been some really cool HVAC and heat pump technologies that have gotten a lot of attention. I think they were saying this year is going to be like the year of the heat pump. In reality, if you ask the average person on the street, like, what is a heat pump? Nobody knows, right? So, like, I think there's a part of this where a function of, governmental funding and private sector funding comes in, but there's also this behavioral change aspect of it that it's great that we're getting people excited about heat pumps. It's great that we have companies that make it easier for residential customers to get solar and storage. And as the greater public feels like they can participate in the new green economy, I think it's a lot easier for them to vote yes on propositions that come across their desk as voters and elect officials that have, those same aligned interests. So when I think about, what's going to really change things, I see where the max amount of people can benefit. So it's not just the wealthiest among us who get to participate. It's, folks who are struggling to make it day by day. You get some of those government granting and opportunities so that they're putting heat pump water heaters in, multi-unit apartment complexes. It's the funding so that people in rural areas get to have reliable electricity because there's a microgrid there and all those different things.
An area you mentioned, both of you though, is farming, essentially agriculture, away from hardware. Why is that an opportunity for a climate-focused investor?
Sure. So it's a space, like if we are talking about food in general, for example, like the way you're farming or producing food is emitting a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So you have a way to mitigate that, to reduce it. Things about, alternative proteins. We invested in startups doing insect-based for animals. You're thinking about fish farming, etc., these kind of areas. But you're thinking about how you can help the production of food or food waste also. We invest in circular economy for food. You're bringing at the supermarkets some stuff that are close to preemptions and helping them to sort it out or giving it to NGOs. So that's kind of stuff that we are also looking into.
Sophie, we're increasingly moving away from the sort of flashy Rivian, Tesla, even the Nikola battery electric semi-truck to agriculture. I asked you this question on the phone the other day. If you envisage a graph that showed the biggest net contributors from an emissions perspective or a carbon perspective, where would you target your dollars, on that graph in terms of industries, in terms of end use cases?
I would say the most over-invested, under significant from an impact perspective area would be transportation, right? Like we've just been talking about. And then on the flip side, we have been neglecting industry. I know, massive bucket,
What do you
right?
mean by industry?
Yeah, let's break that down. So cement, steel, a lot of manufacturing, circular economy, recycling, the list kind of goes on and on. A lot of building material like manufacturing, right, all falls into that category. So I think mostly physical goods, right? And VCs, it turns out, shy away from that a little bit.
Is it because they're not Silicon Valley cool things?
I think it's an area just like the carbon market investment and often sometimes the built environment that truly requires technical expertise. And also sometimes you're selling into really, really long-term contracts and markets that are up and coming and projected to be quite large, but maybe right now those procurement chains aren't structured.
Matthieu, part of that I recognize in our reporting at least is you have energy companies as one example. Total has a venture arm. They make kind of smaller bets in things that disrupt what they currently do. Do you see opportunity in models like that to partner with strategics?
Yes, so there is a lot of corporations that are looking at two things: decarbonizing their existing business, but also creating a greenfield, in fact, so new investment. And they are diversifying a lot. So oil and gas companies are doing that from charging station to utility, so electricity, and other areas, even carbon removal technologies for some of them. So we are definitely seeing that for oil and gas, but in other sectors too.
Final quick fire round in our last few minutes. What is the biggest risk or headwind? The title of this panel is Funding the Climate Tech Boom. So what threatens our ability to fund the climate tech boom? Sophie?
Off the top of my head, maybe lack of creativity around capitalization structures. So as you know, it's not just going to be one pool of capital. It won't just be venture. So will the LPs and the corporates and the entire ecosystem allow for this kind of interconnectivity of different asset classes?
Nneka?
I think it's really emotional. People feeling like they can actually make a difference. Sometimes the problem feels so huge. And even though I talk to investors and founders every day, they're investors who, I pitch a company and they say, like, how does that even work? Will that even make a dent? And we need everyone to believe like 1% every day is better and better. Yeah.
And I guess coming back on the financial stack, so we have venture arm, we have like private equity, etc. But in the middle, there is a lot of topics around debt financing, etc. And I think the market is still figuring out how to do it for climate tech. Yeah.
Something painful for many in this room, but you've given me an opportunity. Silicon Valley Bank. You know, we've been talking on a daily basis, and there are a few mutters in the room, but those were the kind of startups and early stage companies that the ecosystem supported. Many think there's a de facto tightening of financial conditions. Does climate, and let's make it a quick fire round, does climate-related tech survive this kind of near-term de facto tightening of financial conditions, Sophie?
Survive, yes.
Survive, yes. Thrive, maybe.
Better? Yes, short-term, maybe impact.
You want to add anything, Sophie, or elaborate?
There's a hole in the ecosystem for venture debt at the moment. I don't believe that that's a chasm.
Okay. We only have a couple of minutes. In fact, I might be cheeky and stretch it, but a brilliant panel. Does anyone have any questions on any side of the room? Yes, at the back there.
Yes, I'm curious. We heard a lot about from the CSOs previously in the keynotes about the pain point of lack of standards for carbon accounting and measurements. Do you see any funding towards startups that are trying to address this problem?
Do you want to go around in order, Sophie?
Yeah, it's a large category. In fact, it's actually the 6th largest of the 300 or so subsectors that we track. So yes, this emissions accountability kind of sustainability reporting. I might argue if we even did a hot fire round of like overvalued, undervalued, that might be an overvalued
Impromptu
category.
hot fire round. Overvalued, undervalued?
Overvalued.
Overvalued.
Overvalued, yeah.
Nneka, do you want to add any more specifics on that?
No, we've just seen so much money towards it, but it means that the people in power know that it's important.
Matthieu?
Yes, we are seeing a lot of companies in the same space, and the differentiators are not that big.
We have another question at the back over there. Oh, we have loads.
Nice.
Techonomy, you're going to let me stretch a couple of minutes? Yeah, sure.
I have totally different questions. My name is Hoy, and I work with a lot of youth from high school, college, to young professionals, and they've been working very hard to solve climate crisis, from advocating on policies to outreach education, because our school system doesn't even teach climate literacy in California and in this country. So my question to you is that you are in such influential position because you're investing in startup and creating jobs. Can you send a very, very clear message to the people in the system that we have to teach climate literacy starting from kindergarten all the way up to higher education?
Matthieu, let's start with you.
No, yes, and I think first thing you need to teach people is you need to vote. The first big impact is voting, and second thing is you have a bigger impact in large organizations or corporates to move the needle. So I encourage your students to do that,
Yep. I think it's important when I talk to Gen Z and younger folks, they want to work in climate, they know it's important. So it's not just internship, there's lots of startups that are offering internships. We work a lot with university programs and helping people like understand the diligence process, et cetera. So have them reach out to me, happy to talk to folks.
So.
Yeah, and then last I'd say, to work on climate, you don't have to be a PhD in a battery lab, right? And so we need everybody across all sorts of functional areas and certainly all geographies. And I think that folks that are able to work on climate in some way feel inspired and motivated and then will vote with their dollars and kind of be a part of the ecosystem even more.
We are out of time. Sophie Purdom, Climate Tech VC co-founder, Nneka Kibuule, Principal Aligned Climate Ventures, and Matthieu Soulé, BNP C.Lab Americas.
Thank you.
What's your title? Boss.
Head.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
you for
you,
listening.
Ed.